so much for coming. Have any of you read any of the book yet? So, none of you? So, I've been serializing chapters on kind of like a modern Dickens, you could say, on elephantjournal.com. I grew up wanting to be a writer. At first I wanted to be thank you. I wanted to be a baseball journalist, and then as I grew up, I fell in love with the Beat generation, which I actually grew up around a little bit in Boulder, Colorado, and writing is really my first and one of my only loves. And I tripped into starting Elephant Magazine. I don't know if we have copies left, but it was a print publication. It went national in the U.S. and around Canada and a little bit elsewhere. Very quickly it was successful, and we were printed on environmentally responsible paper. But as we got bigger, the distribution system is such that any magazine you and I read and enjoy sells at best usually around 3 out of 10 copies, and the rest, after being shipped and milled and reshipped and shipped and shipped and shipped, get recycled. And recycling magazines is not very eco. You have to pull the inks out and you have to do a lot to it. So the more I learned about it and the bigger we got, the less I was comfortable. So we went online, and we're far bigger now online, 1.3 million readers a month, and it's comparable to Yoga Journal or other mainstream publications. And staying independent is one of our core values. Independent media is a bit of an endangered species, just like the elephant itself. So can you hear okay? I know I'm like 10 feet away at most. But I came back to my first love, which is not publishing or selling ads or editing articles or anything. I like all that fine, and it's vital to our mission, which I am passionate about, which is to be a benefit to the world, which needs it, God knows, and to be a benefit, hopefully, to ourselves, to change the world and change ourselves along the way, and to do so with a sense of humor and compassion, hopefully, and frankness, which I find is sorely missing in, capitalism generally, where there's a lot of marketing and PR, even at wonderful events like this or wonderful communities like the yoga community. There's a lot of marketing and PR, and most of that is not necessarily transparent. So that's Elephant's vision and role, and we've been growing rapidly. Bryony is local to Toronto, so if you live here and you ever want to write or you want to share a video or a poem or artwork or anything, you can talk with her, or any of us, and the info is on the back of these stickers. So once Elephant became successful online, which took a lot of work to rebuild it for the second time online, I wanted to get back to writing, and that's what this is, and it's pretty cathartic and fun for me to write. I think for people with and I'm not going to say this in a serious way because that would be hypocritical, but I think for people with a sense of humor, it's pretty fun. For people who take the yoga scene or the environmental kind of activism scene or the hipsterific kind of world overly seriously, this novel can be insulting because it is directly meant to make fun of me and to make fun of probably you and to make fun of this whole world, because a fundamental spiritual value which often is lost along the way is having a sense of humor about ourselves. Why? Because having a raw and open heart is fundamental to being awake and being a decent human being. And often we, the more successful we get, or think we're, more successful we think we are on any path, the more we take ourselves seriously and forget to smile. And that's why children can be so wonderful, or the open sky, because it can kind of give us a sense of perspective. My Buddhist teacher, I grew up in the Buddhist community, which is also right for being made fun of and is made fun of in here, has a great quote. He says, chaos should be regarded as extremely good news. Because the ego wants to keep everything, the ego is like the ultimate OCD. Everything neat and fixed and perfect. And while there's nothing wrong with having things be neat and uplifted and elegant, that can be done out of a sense of appreciation and celebration, not being overly serious about ourselves. So part of the reason we didn't really publicize today, so again, I sincerely appreciate you all for being curious, another great spiritual value, is because I'm not done. It was intended to be finished, so you're getting a pre-debut reading. And in Boulder, Colorado, where I'm from, Nirvana, everyone knows Nirvana, the band, they played the little cafe I grew up in back in the day, and infamously only a couple people showed up. So while I'm not Nirvana, it gives me, it's a nice moment for me of having, now we're up to, looks like 7 or 8 people. So we're nearly double the size of where we started. This is a movement, you could say. So I wrote a couple chapters here in Toronto. We're nearly at the end of the book. The basic plot is, and that'll be reflected on the cover, is 2 young people, Eco Boy versus Yoga Girl. They fall in love. They both take themselves incredibly seriously. Eco Boy is an activist. He wants to change the world. He doesn't particularly like himself. He's, kind of a cliche hipster. Both are meant to be cliches, and through the course of the novel, they break that cliche-ness. Doesn't really work. And so they kind of fall apart, and that's when the good news happens. They grow up a little bit, and you'll have to read to the end to find out what happens. But they fall in love with each other's cliche-ness. Eco Boy feels like Yoga Girl is a perfect compliment to him because she's probably spiritual and she's got her life together, and he doesn't like himself, and she's clean and showers, and he is dirty and wears old hipster t-shirts. Here we go. And although I did shower this morning, and he has a great mustache as well. He's much cooler than I am. And well, a lot of people have asked that who have been reading on Elephant, and it's definitely, I have very little interest in pure fiction, in Twilight fiction kind of thing. If it's based out of my experience, then hopefully it's a little more risky and genuine. So it is, but it's certainly neither character is based on myself or anyone I've dated. Although, some people might challenge that who know better and read it. And Yoga Girl, sees hipster Eco Boy and feels like he's very grounded, he's very earthy. She's frankly very bored. She's a Trustafarian. She's one of those who, goes to yoga teacher training without ever intending to be a teacher. She just doesn't really know what to do with her life, and doesn't really get a lot of enjoyment out of anything. She can travel, she can do all the things perhaps we all want to do, like go to some Costa Rica yoga retreat and learn how to surf. And for her, it's she's wealthy and doesn't particularly appreciate the things that someone who's a bit poorer like Eco Boy might be very excited about. So they fall in love, thinking that each will bring something to the table, and they very quickly find, as many of us have experienced in love affairs, that the first moment where that love, that mutual kind of infatuation isn't confirmed, they don't like each other at all. So they break up, they go through some loneliness, and they grow up, and they become, by the end, real people. So the conceit is that everyone in the book is a type. There's a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of my favorite writers, who says, nobody is a type. You might stereotype anyone, but once you get to know them, we're all queer fish, he says. We're all individual, weird, wonderful, odd, mixed up people. And so that's the conceit of this book, is that everyone's sort of a type. Everyone they meet has a sort of action figure name. And then by the end, their genuine names are revealed, sort of like Mr. Big in Sex and the City. if you're a fan of that. And you know, at the point when they become sort of real human beings, then we know them by their names. So a lot of the chapters are definitely not appropriate for family settings. There's a lot of love, so to speak, in here. I joked that in the very beginning when I was sort of finding the story, if I didn't know what to write, I just wrote a sex scene. So there's a lot of that. I hope you don't mind. But I'm actually, later on in the book, there's not much sex, there's a lot more loneliness. And let's see. So this one is, has anyone heard about the Lululemon see-through hot shorts controversy? So it's kind of painful business-wise. They sent an entire order of, I don't know what they are, but leggings or something that are see-through out to all their stores. And of course it's been pretty big news. Mainstream media is enjoying this story, and they had to recall the whole thing. We just had, the presenters had dinner with Lululemon last night, and I was happy as an environmental journalist to hear that they're recalling all of it and recycling all of that, because it's their own material, so they can reuse it. So that's kind of a nice lining, so to speak, to that story. So this title is, this chapter is entitled Eco Boy versus Yoga Girl and the Case of the See-Through Lululemon Hot Shorts. And the title of the overall book is The Adventures of Eco Boy versus Yoga Girl. And again, it's a loving send-up of our world and myself. And if you want to find more chapters, you can go to Eco Boy versus Yoga Girl on Facebook. And there's also a page on Elephant. What is it? elephantjournal.com/
Eco Boy.
I don't think so.
No?
No, it's like coffee table or something.
Oh, books.
Books?
Yeah.
elephantjournal.com/books. And the book will be out briefly. So each chapter begins with a serious quote from an anonymous Dr. Willard Evans. This life is full of confusion, neurosis, selfishness, PR and marketing hype. But all that bullshit is just clouds in the sky. The solution is simple. Don't rearrange the clouds. Drop the project. Appreciate the weather as it is. Practice meditation. Train one's mind to remember the sun. No, to be the sun. That isn't to say that positivity works. It doesn't. The good news is better than some sort of kindergarten spirituality. The good news is that you and I are already fundamentally good to go. The best advice my Buddhist teacher ever gave me was simple. Sit. Sit more. Sit. Please sit. Dr. Willard Evans. And sit is meditation. Yes. That's not clear. It's linked in here. And here's the chapter. She was upset. This was not cool. This was a serious problem. Sure, it was a serious first world problem. Women in other countries had to, like, put plastic jugs of water on their head and walk all day, or get raped, or eat dirt, which is crazy. But that wasn't her karma, that was theirs. Remember, just in case it's not clear, she's a somewhat off-putting, shallow, self-involved person. Okay. But that wasn't her karma, that was theirs. Her karma, apparently, was to get fucked by Lululemon. She'd gone to class and worn her new Lulu shorts. She was so excited she hadn't bothered to wash them first. And she reserved her usual place in the front row so she could see herself nice and big in the mirror. But in the corners, only one person could sit by her. And she placed her block and towel and water bottle on that side, warding them off. Any of us do that? She didn't like people doing yoga by her, though she didn't mind them looking at her. So she's doing class effortlessly, showing off, breathing Darth Vader style, rocking hard poses on her own time, the best way to make sure folks notice. And she's not thinking about getting dumped by Eco Boy. This is pretty late in the book. She's feeling fresh and clear. And then after class, the thin gay yoga teacher comes up. She can't tell if he's gay or not. He has a hot girlfriend 12 years younger than him, but man. And he respectfully touches her arm and says, "Next class, please wear more appropriate clothing." She blanches and leaves and has no idea what she's talking about until she gets to the bathroom. And then she sees it, and by it she means all of it. All of her, especially in, forward folds. So Yoga Girl returns to Lululemon and makes a stink and returns all 4 pairs of her new, apparently see-through yoga shorts. Thanks for nothing, literally, Lulu. She should sue. Over happy hour later that day, Yoga Girl explained to conveniently not as pretty girlfriend, so remember they all have type names, conveniently not as pretty girlfriend, how spiritual she was now. I'm a new person, she said, sipping her house red. She was rich, but always bought the house wine. You're so blessed, Yoga Girl, not as pretty girlfriend said. They didn't meet any boys, and there's only so much you can say about a spiritual experience you haven't really had, so they parted ways after an hour. Yoga Girl drove home. It's a Lexus hybrid SUV, by the way, and parked and went inside and thought about herself. So this book tends to swing between being a little heartfelt and being incredibly cynical. So if you hate the cynical stuff, some of you serious yoga types.
And funny.
What's that?
And funny.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, we've had a good time. And the readership has been good. So I think, there's some heartfelt, there's some funny, and there's some just kind of making fun of ourselves. Yoga Girl felt naked all day, every day. After a lifetime of perfect white winter, she thawed. If even a light spring breeze came by, she felt it tickle her raw, open, naked heart. There's a Buddhist legend Ika Boy told her once about the beautiful lotus flower that rises out of a deep, dark, muddy lake. And there's some enlightened Buddha baby that is born out of that flower. She didn't know what that legend had to do with anything, but that's what she felt like now. She felt like a newborn, a born-again human, a born-again Trustafarian. She wanted to strip the layers that protected her from the world. For in protecting herself from pain, she had insulated herself from life itself. She wanted to live, so she called up Mommy. Mom, I don't want your and Daddy's money anymore. That's silly, Mom said. How would you afford those see-through Lululemon hot shorts? And Mom cackled at her, then coughed. I'm serious, Mommy. I've been through a lot. I've had a revelation, kinda. I broke up. She skipped the part about getting broken up with Eco Boy in brackets. And now I see the world in a whole new way. You sound like a cult member, Mom replied, only half listening. The other half of Mom was focusing on smoking a Nat Sherman while reading a DWR catalog while wondering how much it would cost to reupholster her deck cushions in salmon orange. Those things are such rip-offs. I'm serious, Mommy, Yoga Mom's daughter was droning on. I want to be on my own and get my own job and live my own life. So please, can you stop sending me money? And I'm not going to call asking for anything anymore. I need to grow up. I'm nearly 30 after all. You're 26, honey. I want to live on my own 2 feet, I need to grow up. Mom didn't care. Sure, whatever makes you happy, darling. So you want me to void your trust, too? I could give it to this wonderful animal sanctuary for horses I was just reading about in W. Yoga Girl replied. Didn't think so. Meaning she didn't say anything. There was no answer to that one. Didn't think so. I went through this phase when I was 22. Your generation is a little slower, a little lazier, a little more selfish. Go pretend to be poor for a year or two while drinking $9 fancy coffees in fancy cafes. Mom, they talked about the economy and what their neighbors were doing to their house and how this party was that Yoga Mom had gone to and how it was all bullshit for a while. And then Yoga Girl hung up and bored went to yoga class. Seventh time that week, 23rd time that month. She never practiced at home except to take photos of herself doing inversions for her flattering Instagram followers. Across the way, Eco Boy wasn't doing nearly so well. He was eating Ben & Jerry's by the gallon, gaining weight. He hadn't bouldered in a week. He was flabby. He was staying up till 4 a.m. every night. He was drinking big pitchers of cheap beer in dark basements, playing pool and trying to ask girls out. And he was sex obsessed, trying to fill the space. What's her name had left him already, so he eyed random girls on the street or in the cafe or at yoga class, like a big bear eyes a big fish that's swimming in circles in the shady part of a big street. What's her name had left him. He was too sad and moody and ugly right now. So last night he'd asked a random girl who was a friend, to come by to watch a movie at 11 p.m. She had great long curly hair and great breasts and great style and big lips and big eyes, and she was either flirting with him all the time or just being nice. Apparently, she was just being nice. She demurred politely, saying, "I have to get up early." The only thing he kept doing was going to yoga, though it was painful to see his flab growing daily around his midsection. He still looked hot and up-dog. The mirrors were lined with cleavage, and though he never practiced ujjayi, too mentally lazy, the classes calmed him down, his thoughts running out like a spool and growing quiet, if only to fall into dreamland in shavasana. Of course, he was hoping to run into Yoga Girl. God knows why. She was crazy and he was scared of her. Sure, she was attractive, but everyone's attractive. Sure, she was probably still in love with him, he figured. But he was an admitted egotist, a hardcore egotist, and whether others loved or hated or even noticed him was irrelevant. Little shout out to Elephant. Was irrelevant. While he didn't really like himself, he most certainly loved himself, or cared about himself at least. Am I reading this okay? I haven't read out loud too much, except for the case, which is kind of different reading. No, he wanted to run into her because though there was drama and hate and love, infatuation, and passion and boredom, their relationship was familiar. Looking at her almond eyes, her slim, muscular, pale shoulders, her smooth legs and perfect feet with neon orange nails. It was all familiar, like revisiting your high school for your 5th reunion, or watching a few minutes of Affair to Remember or The Candidating for the 11th time. So he biked to, in brackets, yoga studio. Day after day, his scratched up black road bike twitching below him, left, right, as the road hummed beneath his old blue New Balance kicks. Yet another Republican-owned company that makes all its money off liberals and youngins. And he looked in the parking lot for her Lexus as he walked in. She always had parked right by the entrance. She'd rather drive around the parking lot in circles for 10 minutes than park half a block off. He didn't get why Americans paid exercise when they refused to walk half a block from their cars to their exercise, let alone walk or bike to the gym or studio. Yoga Girl was not interested in Eco Boy anymore. He represented a sort of thought bubble that had popped. She'd taken to parking half a block off from the studio, and then waiting until class was nearly going to begin. And if she saw Eco Boy right up, she'd drive off. She didn't need the drama. Her born-again human status was new and fresh and fragile, and she feared nothing, and she was afraid of losing that fearlessness. I think that's an experience we all have when we have a brief moment of spiritual calm. Ironically, our egos are very scared of losing that. Saturday, is this good? Should I keep going? Good enough? Yeah? All right. The crowd just went wild for those of you on video who can tell. Saturday at Farmer's Market was when she met Preppy Mate, or Preppy Mate. He'd invested a ton in a few companies and made a bundle by the time he was 25, and he was preppy, like out of a Brooks Brothers F. Scott Fitzgerald fantasy. And he was tall and comforting in his self-assurance, and though his smile squanched up wrong at her, and he was too thin, the rest of him was perfect, and she knew she could be poor with him. He'd pay for everything. They met in front of the cheese booth, where she was counting change, trying to afford the $8 pyramid goat cheese that was hard on the outside and gooey on the inside, great for crackers and eating when you're bored and sitting inside all day, pretending to read Alice Walker. Or, what's his name, Palinchuk?
Chuck.
She didn't know how to spell that guy's name. Preppy Mate came up, having seen her rear. He came around to see her breast and face. It all checked out. Just being a guy. He saw her counting change and handsomely offered to pay. And they walked up and down the market buying expensive local things, though remember, taxes included. And before long, he'd offered his jacket for that butt of hers, and they were sitting by a stream eating lunch and drinking lukewarm, bitter coffee out of plastic-lined white bleach cups. It was summer, so that's one thing we try and do throughout this is there's like little eco or yoga moments where if you're, part of the point of this is to make fun of our own scene, but for people who don't care about our scene, it's very easy to make fun of our scene. And if they enjoy, making fun of us, so to speak, they can learn a little bit along the way. Like to-go cups are plastic lined, not recyclable, not compostable, not good for the environment or our own health. Hot water and plastic. It's not so good. And it's bleached, which isn't good for our water. I'm into that environmental stuff. It was summer, and he was wearing a scarf and a small-brimmed straw fedora. For a second, she thought of Ika Boy and wondered who would win if the two of them got in a fight. That the guy is wearing a scarf and a straw fedora is making fun of pretty much every man in Santa Monica or Venice, California. And a lot of men at yoga conferences generally. And a night or two later, she let Preppy Mate kiss her, and suddenly she had a new boyfriend, and finally she felt safe and comfortable and loved again. And over the next few nights, she let herself fall asleep to life again. It was tiring being awake, being raw, being vulnerable. She didn't know how people did it. She reverted to acting her way through life. She could act charming in a sort of manic way. She could act sane in a sort of convincing way, at least in the short term. She could act through life as if it were a movie. And if one clique figured her out, she could move on to other cliques. Ika Boy had taken to visiting Pine Street Espresso, a dark, manly hipster cafe joint on the corner of, well, two streets. What do you care about fictitious street names? You don't. And there was tons of light in the cafe, it being on a corner with needless ceiling windows. I wrote that one based on Capital Cafe. But he wasn't there for the coffee, which was great, or the Wi-Fi, which was solid, or the people watching, which was terrific. He was there for a Welshite. He didn't know her name still. But Portlandia Kiwi worked there, and she tied her long brown hair to the side, and she had big eyebrows, like early 90s Julia Roberts. And she wore hipster jeans high on her waist and Clark Kent glasses, and she and he talked and flirted, and she gave him a reason to get up in the morning and lay off the ice cream and go vegan again. Because if you're not vegan, you're not even a vegetarian. And that links to an article about how if you're vegetarian, I used to be vegetarian. If you're vegetarian, they're still killing all the male cows and the male chicks. So you're not really vegetarian. He wondered if you were too old for her. He thought of the Zen expression. The question is the answer. He shrugged. Finally, the sixth time he'd gone to the cafe and fourth time he'd seen her working, he asked her name. I'm Ika Boy, in brackets, he said in a gentlemanly, friendly way, putting out his big, strong hand. I'm Portlandia Kiwi, she smiled. Sweetly, with a big summery smile that could melt ice caps. Speeding global warming, raising sea levels, and producing more frequent and more powerful hurricanes. She was devastating. And she'd been talking to him while he was off, mentally thinking about her smile. What? He asked. Sorry, I was thinking about your smile, he smiled. Sometimes being straight up honest is the flirtiest thing there is. She blushed a little, but not much. She was used to it. But he was handsome, his strong chest and shoulders showing nicely between his tired old black Capital t-shirt. And she loved his mustache and his old bicycle, and the way he gripped his little espresso cup as if he were a dainty British blue grandma. Ah, nothing, she said. Well, he cleared his throat, and he looked behind him to make sure there wasn't a line and this wasn't too embarrassing. Well, I was thinking, so would you want to go on a dog hike, or... Sure, she said quickly, putting his brave hesitation out of its misery. Great, he smiled. I'll message you on Facebook. You're on Facebook, right? Give me your number, she replied. Text me. And she saved his number and texted him. C-L-A-R-A. And now we pause. This is what I mentioned in the beginning. And now we pause for this message from our sponsor at Scott Fitzgerald from the opening lines of my all-time favorite short story, The Rich Boy. Begin with an individual, and before you know it, you find that you have created a type. Begin with a type, and you find that you have created nothing. That is because we're all queer fish, queerer behind our faces and voices than we want anyone to know or than we know ourselves. When I hear a man proclaiming himself an average, honest, open fellow, I feel pretty sure he has some definite and perhaps terrible abnormality which he has agreed to conceal. And now we return to our regularly scheduled infantile drama. He said some funny, charming stuff and went back to his table and worked at his laptop for a bit, then said bye, handsomely and loudly and calmly, as he pushed the push sign half an hour later. And just half an hour after that, he texted her. I know we said dog walk sometime, but I'm going to yoga 5:30. You join it free? It's all written in text language without, any extraneous vowels or consonants. She replied 2 minutes later. He loved girls who replied when they got texts, instead of waiting a week. No games equals a girl worth going out with. Yes, sure, where? She replied. Yoga studio, in brackets, 5:30. Great teacher, my treat. Nice, okay, see you. This was good. Yoga girl would probably be there and he could show off that he had a date. It wasn't miserable and fat and lonely without her, which he was. So that's that chapter. And I need a drink. Water will do. In my generation and younger, and it's probably in every generation now, and it's a theme throughout this novel, is how people, even in dating, interact as little as possible. So when you meet someone, you know, the days of calling someone up and asking them out are over. New York Times did a big article on this, and saying The End of Courtship or something was the title, about how instead of asking a girl out in Brooklyn or wherever in the sort of hipster world, people say, do you want to go for a dog hike, or do you want to meet me at a bar for a show, or do you want to go to this art gallery? It's always an activity. And there's a good and there's a bad aspect to that. The good is that it's more comfortable and relaxed and low risk. If you don't like the person, you're doing a fun activity. Or if you don't connect. Or if you're shy, and it's helpful to have other things going on. The downside is often the boundary between dating and not dating is almost non-existent. So people, you know, hang out for a couple weeks and then stop hanging out. And it's all done through text, generally, or Facebook messages. It's pretty fun. I mean, it's been pretty fun to write. And the only people I think who will get offended are people, perhaps like myself, who are taking some part of ourselves seriously. Because I really am making fun of, you know, I grew up in, I mean, I'm a sort of walking cliche. I grew up in a Buddhist community in Boulder, Colorado. I don't know if you know the reputation of Boulder, but it's often termed like 25 square miles surrounded by reality, the Republic of Boulder. It's very liberal, very bike friendly, very healthy, very eco. You know, the Beat generation had a strong connection there. There's a huge, you know, there's a yoga studio and cafe on every corner of every block. Anyway, that's his reputation. You?
No, it's just an observation. I love how you've given them the names Yoga Girl and Eco Boy, because we are so comfortable with typecasting people and putting people into their pigeonholes, you know. So I think by what you've done with naming them, and only naming them when they become more real and more in their own skin at the end, is brilliant, because it allows us, when we're reading, I guess, to step outside of ourselves too, with our, you know, our habit of putting people in pigeonholes. So when you're reading, it's like, oh, I do that, you know. So you become aware as you're reading right throughout the story of your habit of doing that to people, even yourself, you know. So I've been reading, listening to Eckhart Tolle, and he said when he was younger, I think he was 19 or something, and he was suicidal, and he was saying to himself, I can't live with myself anymore. And all of a sudden he sort of had this feeling of, who am I and who is myself? You know, he had that sort of sense of two people. And I guess it kind of relates to how you've named these characters, the names that you've given them, because, you know, just of that, like I said, just going back to the pigeonholing people, and instead of just accepting them who they are in their own being, their own self. Does that make sense? Am I just sort of talking in circles? Yeah, so, yeah, there's two parts of us and there's two parts of other people, you know, the real person and who you perceive them to be. You know, so I don't know, I just found that interesting, that part of it. I mean, maybe I'm getting a bit too serious, but yeah, I also enjoyed the dry wit as well. I had a few chuckles all throughout there. So yeah, so nothing brutal, just appreciation. Yeah, so I'll definitely be reading that when it comes out.
Is it going to be print or online? It'll be both. Yeah. So we actually have 2 other books that are coming out this year. One is a collection of my essays with Elephant Journal, just the best stuff. Lucky for you, because there's a lot of stuff that isn't worth putting in a book. But there are some, I think, some pretty good things that come up once in a while. Ryan is a tough critic, and she's nodding, so that's flattering. And then the third one, and that one's called Self-Help is Bad for You. And then the third one is a collection of my interviews with like Dr. Andrew Weil or Michael Pollan or Alice Walker, who's mentioned in here, or Amy Goodman, or Deepak Chopra, Paul Hawken. I've interviewed, senators and governors and hundreds of people over the years. Sean Corn many times. So they'll all be collected in a book, and that title is probably going to be Conversations with My Idols is the title. So people I think are good examples. So thank you for pointing that out. If you've read the whole thing, which no one has here, as it's serialized, when Clara, who's referred to as Portlandia Kiwi, because she's from New Zealand, and she wears summer dresses all the time, very hipster girlish. When she texts Clara, that's the first name in the entire book. So that's why it goes into that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which is very much on my mind, because it's pointing out that dichotomy you were appreciating. And if people get too serious about that, that is the point. I mean, it is meant to be a sort of spiritual book in a very personal, but also very accessible and fun way. One of my dreams, one of my idols who I haven't yet interviewed is Jamie Oliver, because more than anyone I know, he's an example of someone who is actually offering change that is healthy to society in the dumbest, most accessible way, which is the reality show TV, and it's popular. So he's talking about all the stuff Elephant talks about, appreciating food, real food, Michael Pollan kind of stuff, if you know Michael Pollan. He's worth checking out if you don't. But he's doing it in a reality TV show, so he's actually not just talking to the choir, he's talking to the people who need to hear it. Did you want to say something? Sorry, we kept going ladies first, I bet.
With being read, it came across to me like if you think of the theater, we always talk about the wall, where you don't step outside of the wall.
Louder.
Sure, how's that? In theater, like a stage, they talk about not breaking the wall. You're always in your scene and your character. And that came across when you're reading it as though you're constantly busting out of the scene, which I thought was a great way to do it. And the points come across all that way too, and it's funny, so it's going to keep people reading it. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, now I'm gonna sing my, it's actually, I think it's usually bad writing to break the wall. We actually teach our editors that editing is so important, because the second a reader sees a typo or a messed up M-dash or whatever, you start thinking about the clumsiness of the writing instead of the subject of what they're reading. But for some reason in fiction, sometimes it's fun because you're describing a cafe. Like, I don't know if you're referring to the cafe moment, but I'm saying the cafe is on the corner of these 2 streets, and what do you care what the names of the streets are? I'm making this up. It's fictitious. And it's sort of telling the lie to, we all know we're reading a sort of autobiographical fiction, even though it's not about me or my life. It is fiction, and it is also my experience. So, looks like we're out of time. Yeah.
One last question. Are we at the hour? Okay.
As reading it, just the title, Eco Boy and Yoga Girl, I thought, like Doonesbury, I could see a comic strip coming out of it.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of making it into a comic strip? Those 2 characters.
Well, it will be illustrated. I'm going to try and illustrate it myself. I used to be a bit of an artist, but not since I decided not to be a professional artist have I really done much. So it will very much be illustrated. And, you know, who knows if it's coherent and successful, and I think it will be. We're going to tour pretty hard with the book. You know, a lot of things could happen out of it. It's pretty visual, it's pretty sexy, it's pretty heartfelt, and, you know, we'll see. So thank you so much. It's a real honor. I'm going to remember this. This is the pre-debut reading before the book's even available. So thank you so much.